So you have Ōsweald Bera in your hands. What's next? Ōsweald Bera is at its heart nothing but a story, but it's a story that's been written in a very particular way, a way that takes you from knowing basically nothing about Old English to being able to read authentic prose texts. So how does this work? How does the book do it? Well, in this video, I will show you how, and I will give you a simple strategy you can use with the book to get the most out of your time with the bear. By the way, if you'd prefer to read this than to watch it, you can get a PDF copy of this How to Use guide by subscribing to my Substack. A link for that is in the description. You'll just find it in the footer of the welcome email. And if you're already subscribed, check the footer of the most recent issue that you got. Wait, do you have Ōsweald Bera in your hands? If not, you can go over to ōswealdbera.com so you can pick up your copy today. So, now that you've got it, let's figure out how to use it. Let's start by orienting ourselves with the format of the book. Ōsweald Bera is a novel of 28 chapters. I like to think of it as the Old English novel that never was. The chapters range in length from about 600 words long to 1400 words, generally increasing as you go through the book and you get better at Old English. Each chapter is headed by a beautiful illustration by the artist Alex Swanson, link to his site in the description, which will hopefully help you establish a link between what's going on in the story as well as some visuals. We know that really helps with memory. At the end of each chapter, there's a word hoard, which is a nice Old English way of saying a glossary. This contains a list of all the new words in alphabetical order that were introduced in that chapter. In some chapters, there's also a list of idioms alongside the word hoard. This is used where we have situations where you have words that come together to create a meaning that the individual words themselves don't have. For example, in modern English, when you say someone kicked the bucket, you often mean that they died. The words kick, the, and bucket, there's no dying in any of them, but when you put them together, it means die, and that's an idiom. When I use one of these idiomatic phrases in Old English in the main text, I put it in bold the first time it appears, and then you will see it show up in the idiom list at the end of the chapter. This is just to let you know that there's something potentially non-obvious going on there with the use of the words. Finally, after the word hoard and the list of idioms, there is a list of questions, 10 questions per chapter, which are comprehension questions. They're meant to assess whether you understood the plot of the chapter. Finally, after all 28 chapters, you have a big list of idioms and a big word hoard with all of the idioms and words that appear anywhere in the book, listed in alphabetical order. So what is the philosophy of the book? Why is it designed in this way? It's designed around the following two principles. Principle 1, consuming comprehensible input, that is, consuming messages in the target language that you can in some sense understand, is the foundation of acquiring a language. Principle 2, the biggest obstacle to comprehension is not unknown grammar, but unknown vocabulary. That is, too many new words at a time impedes comprehension. And that leads to a lack of understanding the message, which, by principle 1, leads to a lack of acquiring the language. This means that the overriding principle of organization I use throughout the book is limiting the amount of new words that you encounter at any given time. What this looks like in practice is that every chapter uses, on average, 50 new words. It introduces you to 50 new words of Old English. Some chapters introduce a few more, and some introduce actually far fewer. As a result, by the end of the book, you will have been introduced to about 1,300 new words of common Old English vocabulary, which is a fairly respectable word hoard of your own, if I may say. If you've truly internalized all of these words, you will be able to immediately go and start reading authentic prose texts on the easier end of the difficulty spectrum, things like the Wessex Gospels, for instance. I'll make another video about where to go after Ōsweald another day. Believe me, I have a whole sequence planned out for you. Now, if 50 words per chapter seems like a lot, remember that many of these words will not be altogether new to you as a modern English speaker. For example, you may not be shocked to learn that feld means field, or that hond means hand. Some words may require you to squint a bit. It's not hard to see the relationship between hus and house, for instance, but it may take a little bit of work to recognize that hlaaf in Old English corresponds to loaf in modern English, and actually the word often means bread in Old English. Another factor lightening the vocabulary load is that words come in families. So when you learn a word recht, meaning right, in all of its various meanings, learning the words rechtwijs, righteous, and rechtwijsnes, righteousness, won't tax your resources overly, at least not compared to learning a completely new word family. With that in mind, your goals in each chapter are the following in rough order of priority. Number 1, to understand what happens in the chapter. Number 2, to acquire the roughly 50 new words that the chapter introduces. And number 3, to allow your mind to acquire the grammatical patterns presented in the chapter implicitly. This is probably going to take multiple read-throughs. For one thing, it's unlikely that you will be able to learn a word given one exposure. Let's assume that you need somewhere between 12 and 20 exposures to learn a word, as some research has suggested. This may not be the right range of numbers for each word. I'm sure it depends on a lot of things, but it's probably somewhere in that neighborhood. The book would be very boring and highly unnatural if I repeated every word in it between 12 and 20 times. Instead, what I did was I tried to repeat the words of the book as much as I thought that the plot would bear. I still wanted it to be enjoyable to read after all. But few words, I would say, in the book are mentioned more than 20 times. So that means that just one read-through probably will not allow you to acquire all of the words of the book. But guess what? Many, many more words are mentioned 6 or 7 times in the book. So if you read the book through 3 times, hey, you've got your 20 exposures right there. And so you'll be able to acquire all of those words as well. Here's what I would recommend. It's a multi-stage reading process. Step 1. When you first come to a chapter, read through it casually as you would any other book. There will be words you don't understand, yes, but there will be many more words that you do, I dare say. Read through anyway. The purpose of this first read-through is to give you a sense of the overall plot of the chapter. After you've finished this first read-through, turn to the questions at the end of the chapter and see if you can answer them. You can answer them in your head, on paper, in Old English, in Modern English, in any language from Aramaic to Zulu, if you want. The point is that these 10 questions are there to test that you understood the main point of the chapter. What were the main things that happened? What are you going to need to know in order to continue on? If you can understand them all, then you can feel confident that you can move on right away to the next read-through. If, on the other hand, some comprehension questions ended up giving you trouble, this could indicate that there's a section in there that's a bit tricky. Mark down which questions you weren't able to answer easily, and we'll return to them after the next read-through. But now you can also move on. This brings us to step 2. After a little break, and I actually think that's quite important, to take a little bit of a break before you read it again, reread the chapter. And this time, when you come to a word that you don't understand, write it down. Now, if you're the kind of person who doesn't like to write in their books, write it on a separate piece of paper. If you like writing in your books, write it in the margin. Up to you. I actually do it in a separate piece of paper because I don't like to clutter up the page. I like that clean experience, but hey, that's me. You'll probably find actually on this second read-through that you understand words that you didn't understand in the first read-through just by virtue of understanding the whole plot of the chapter now, and by virtue of having done a little bit of a rest in between your first and second read-throughs. But inevitably, you'll find some words that you still don't understand, so as you go, write them all down. Then, if there were any comprehension questions you didn't quite get after the first read-through, slow down when you get to that point of the text. By the way, the comprehension questions after each chapter are organized chronologically. So the first one discusses the first plot point of the chapter, the second one, the second plot point, and so on and so forth. Make sure you don't leave the section before you understand how to answer that question that you had trouble with. If this means looking up words in the word hoard, either at the end of the chapter or at the end of the book, so be it. Do not move on from this section until you understand what happened. The rest of the sections you can sail through and simply write down the words you don't know. Once you've finished this read-through and you've clarified any plot-based questions that you had, take your list of unknown words and look them all up in the word hoard at the end of the book. And I think it's easier to do this after your read-through than during your read-through because you're not always flipping. So look them all up at once and write down their meanings in, say, Modern English or whatever language you prefer, beside the Old English. As you look each of these words up, pause to see if there's any connection you can make between the Old English word and a Modern English word. the modern English word may have changed meaning, so sometimes you have to be a bit creative. You can also go and look online, say in Wiktionary, to see etymological information about the word. Sometimes you can also make connections with other Germanic languages if you know them, German, Dutch, Scandinavian languages, and so forth. These etymological connections might seem like trivia, but they actually really do help words stick. Step 3. Now read through again, glancing over at your list of unknown words, or rather newly known words, if you get stuck. But after you've gone through the work of looking them all up, plus 2 full read-throughs that you've done already, you will probably not need to look at that list very often. And if after you finish this read-through you still don't feel that it flows, do a 4th, consider it a victory lap. This 3-step process should allow you to get the most benefit of your time with the chapter without spending an inordinate amount of time on the chapter and reaching a point of, frankly, diminishing returns. Now it's time for you to move on to the next chapter. There are 28 chapters in total in the book. If at any point, as you read through, you're starting to feel that things are becoming a bit of a slog and you don't understand what's going on, what I recommend you do is stop and go back to the start of the book and read all the way through, plow all the way through it until you reach the point where you're having trouble. And I dare say, this is what usually happens, that the point where you are having trouble is a few chapters later than it was the first time around. In other words, with each full read through, you become better and you start to bog down later and later in the book. And then you can just take back up your 3-step reading process when you get to new material. This, by the way, can be tremendously motivating when you go back and read a chapter that you know you struggled through the first time, but now it's a breeze. And all that extra reading tends to shake loose whatever troubles you were having with the difficult part of the reading to begin with. At the very least, it should be able to let you advance a little bit more. Then you can keep repeating this process until you get to the very end of the book. Another question that may come up is, as you read, should you read in your head or out loud? Well, I, for one, say if you can read out loud for at least one of the read-throughs, that can be very helpful. I suggest giving it a try. I find it very helpful myself in my own language learning. But if you want to read it out loud, you probably will need at least a rough idea of how to pronounce Old English in order to do so, because there are some strange characters in there that are not immediately obvious how to say. Before too long, you will be able to hear the book yourself, as we're releasing a full cast recording audiobook in 2025. But in the meantime, here are a few tips. First, check out Simon Roper's channel here on YouTube. Many of you probably already know Simon, but he has many videos on Old English pronunciation and related topics, and he really does know his stuff. So I've linked his massive guide to Old English pronunciation, which gives you everything you could possibly ever want to know about how to pronounce Old English, in the description. So check that out. But in a nutshell, I can leave you with some tips that will get you, I think, about 90% of the way there. Number 1, when you see a line over a vowel, this means the vowel is long and you hold it basically twice as long as you would any other vowel. So you have a short ah, but a long ah. 2, when you see A and E smushed together like this, it's pronounced ah, like hat, at least the way I say it. 3, Y. When you see the letter Y, it's pronounced like U, which is kind of an E sound made with lip rounding. So E, U, E, U. Same sound, but you just round your lips. French and German have this sound, and in German it's spelled with a U with the 2 dots, the umlaut over it. Number 4, E-A. The sequence E-A is pronounced ah, ah. Not ea, but ah. So when you see EA, mentally think it's AEA, and then you'll get pretty close. 5, the IE sequence. This is one that is actually a little bit less clear than the other sounds of Old English. I tend to pronounce it as if it were identical to the letter I, so E. But that's just for simplicity's sake. Simon's video has some information about the different ideas there. 6, when you see something that looks like a B and a P in some sort of an unholy combination, that is called thorn. And it's pronounced like the modern English TH sequence. That's th or the, depending on the position within the word. 7, when you see a dot over a C, that is pronounced like the modern English CH, that is ch. 8, When you see a dot over a G, that is pronounced like the modern English Y, that is ya. 9. When you see C, G together with dots over them in sequence, that is pronounced like a modern English J sound, J. And finally 10, SC, when the C has a dot, this is pronounced like modern English SH, sh. Finally, in case you were wondering how we know how a language spoken before the invention of sound recording was pronounced, rest assured it's not all guesswork. Linguists have reconstructed the pronunciation of Old English using a variety of techniques. And what is wild is that linguists mostly agree on this reconstruction, which if you know linguists, that is quite something. It's okay, I can say it, I'm a linguist. The sources of this reconstruction are a bit too complicated to get into in a video like this. I'll probably make a separate video about it at some point, but they include how related languages are pronounced, how descendant languages are pronounced, how loan words into Old English and from Old English were handled, how they showed up in other languages, how other languages' sounds showed up in Old English, and also general linguistic principles that we've gleaned from studying thousands of living languages, as well as the facts of human biology and psychology. Speaking of Simon Roper, he has a very good video about this, so there will be a link to that in the description as well. Let's talk about grammar, shall we? When I mentioned your 3 priorities in reading each chapter, I did not mention this one: be able to produce new grammatical forms accurately. This is because the ability to produce new grammatical forms is a side effect of having acquired the relevant part of the grammar of the language, not the cause. Production always lags behind comprehension anyway. I can read Shakespeare, but I can't write like Shakespeare. While you're in the beginner stage of the language, the most important thing is getting you enough input as possible. Accuracy in production, that is in speaking or writing, that will come later. So this is the reason why the book doesn't contain grammatical charts or descriptions of grammatical rules. Well, that, and we wanted to keep the cost down. That said, sometimes having an explicit knowledge of the grammar does come in handy. For one thing, knowing what's out there, what forms nouns can take, what forms verbs can take, and so on, this can actually help your comprehension. Knowing which word in the sentence is the verb, for instance, based on an ending you learn from a chart, can sometimes be the thing that helps you unlock the meaning of the sentence, thereby allowing you to comprehend the message, thereby allowing your mind to do its thing behind the scenes. And it can also be comforting to get an idea of what you're up against in terms of the whole language of the grammar. Believe it or not, these things are finite, even if it all doesn't sink in right away. For that reason, we're going to be publishing a grammatical companion and workbook for Ōsweald in 2025 as well. But in the meantime, you can very easily find any number of good explanations of Old English grammar. Just to mention 2, Peter Baker's Introduction to Old English is a nice modern grammar-focused textbook. A slightly more hardcore alternative would be Mitchell and Robinson's Guide to Old English, which I actually happen to have right with me. Never leave home without it. Or, if you want something free and you can handle the way Victorians wrote language textbooks, you can check out Henry Sweet's Anglo-Saxon Primer with grammar, notes, and glossary, or any of his other Old English textbooks, which are all freely available online. Links for all of those in the description as well. But remember, in the beginner stage, calibrate your expectations. You shouldn't expect yourself to be able to produce everything that you can understand. At this stage, content yourself with increasing your understanding, and the production will follow. And that, my friends, is how I recommend that you use Ōsweald Bera to get the most out of it. And if you don't have your copy of Ōsweald Bera yet, pick it up today at ōswealdbera.com. And until next time, keep on learning some languages. Or if you'd like something free and you can handle the way Victorians wrote, you can try Henry